There was empires in Africa called Kush, Timbuktu, where every race came to get books. My success to you, even if you wish me the opposite. Sooner or later, we'll all see who the prophet is.
We have the petition, which is ongoing. We did hand in a covering letter that has been circulated. I know from just, what I've circulated alone, I can say some of the statistics that I have that approximately 11 to 12,000 people already have seen that letter, and that's just in terms of networks that I've been sharing it, let alone, and I know lots and lots of people have been sharing it on. So we're finding other ways to let our people know, and that was a covering letter to the Prime Minister, David Cameron, drawing attention of the British government to the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide petition and campaign, and giving some clear guidance. This is the letter here.
Let's have a look at one if we have a little read. The letter is to the Right Honourable David Cameron MP, Prime Minister, United Kingdom, 10 Downing Street, London, SW1A2AA. It reads, Dear Prime Minister, an open letter accompanying the 1st August 2015 delivery of Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide petition. On behalf of the organisers of the annual 1st of August Emancipation Day African People's Reparations March, we are submitting to you a copy of the 2015 version of the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide petition. This petition was first submitted to you last year on the 1st of August 2014. Maangamizi is a Kiswahili term which means the African hellacaust in its continuum of chattel, colonial and neo-colonial enslavement. We will continue to submit this petition to you every year on the 1st of August as part of the annual 1st of August Emancipation Day African People Reparations March until we succeed in our objectives outlined in the petition. The first being that you as Prime Minister of Her Majesty's Government takes all steps within your powers of your office to stop the involvement of Britain and the European Union in continuing the Maangamizi Holocaust by ending its crimes against humanity targeting African people worldwide. The second being, we call upon the UK government to live up to its declarations of commitment to global respect for universal human rights, good governance and democracy in acknowledging and addressing the social and economic legacies of enslavement on contemporary generations of Africans and people of African descent. We believe that this can best be done by establishing an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice, which will go a long way towards institutionalising a reparative truth-seeking process that will contribute to healing and restoring the descendants of the enslaved, in addition to facilitating racial justice and equity between the descendants of the enslaved and enslavers, as well as in the wider society. We are cognizant of the fact that such repair of the relationship between people of African heritage and the rest of society cannot take place without public acknowledgement of the continuing crimes against African people and our descendants over 5 centuries and counting, as well as the UK government taking action to fulfil its responsibilities in such a way and manner as will enable its state and nation to work under the agency of African people in repairing the brutal injustices of the past and the present. And that's really very important. When we put that line, working under the agency of African people, I completely comprehend that, because in what we do in Stop and Search, what we're trying to get across is community-led policing. That's right. So what we're saying to the politicians is that in making decisions about Africa and African peoples, we want it done by African peoples and by the agencies of African peoples. So that's what we're...
So they need to consult with us. We don't want them determining what repair and imposing, you're quite right, brother, what repair looks like for us. We speak for ourselves. We are self-determining agents of our and masters of our own destiny, and that in itself is part of a rehabilitation and a recovery process. We have to get back to taking charge of ourselves again, because our agency is being denied us. We're still treated as subjects, and in fact, you know, for many of us that is still our legal status. And so this is ultimately part of that repair process, of us also doing the internal work that we need to do to organise ourselves and build the organisational formations and the institutions that are going to be part of delivering the social, economic and development programmes to uplift and emancipate our people.
And that's very important because Baba Nelson Madiba Mandela, even though some people have a problem with how he dealt with South Africa once he had come out of, or come off of Robben Island, or come out of prison and made his way to president, and what happened subsequently, because as a lot of people are aware now, economically South Africa is still controlled by Caucasians or by Europeans. But one of the things, or one of the quotes I often say to people that he made really clear, crystal clear, is that poverty is created by men.
That's
yeah,
right.
and just the same way poverty is created by men, if men really want to end poverty, they can really end poverty. And this is some of the outcomes of what we're talking about with the whole reparations movement. It's so unfair when we see countries with huge wealth of resources, like many of the African countries are, yet are described as third world countries, and the frustrating paradoxes that you have countries that have high level of national debt, like the USA and the UK, being seen as first world countries, sitting at the table making economic decisions for Africa at G8, G20 meetings, etc. This has to change for Africa in the 21st century. This is why it's really important that we have our own agencies determining the wealth of African resources, where it can cater for the infrastructures of Africa and for African peoples. This is
That's
where we're
right.
heading.
We're focusing on the people, because there's also, you know, and this is another tendency within our movement, that there are some who see those best placed to speak for us as being African and Caribbean governments. And then there are many people who say not, because just as we have struggles even with the British government where many of us reside, we also have struggles with the governments in Africa and the Caribbean.
Many African Caribbean people, sorry to cut you, they would say that a lot of the African leaders and Caribbean leaders are puppets.
Rise up, there'll be no change, we'll stay enslaved until we fight the system and its ways. Don't be afraid, just be the change. And with all this people power, we'll use peace for power. Hey, until we rise.
Primarily, what I want to get across is that a lot of our people see our African leaders as sellouts, and one of the mistakes I think we as a people often make, correct me if I'm wrong, Esther, is that we seem to think selling out is exclusive to African Caribbean people. From my study of history and from my recollection, all races, all nations and all countries have always had a few people or sellouts that have sold out the majority of people. This has always been the way of human nature and humanity, right?
That's right. And that's why we're emphasising people, because even in international law, the right to a remedy and reparations is the right of peoples, the right of what's classified as being victims, and that just means that you've been harmed in some way, and there you have a right to a remedy, you have a right to redress, you have a right to reparations. It's the right of the people. And unless we are in a direct contract with governments, and we have some mechanism for even holding governments in Africa and the Caribbean to account, and that's not by going and voting on election day. Yeah, it's a lot more than that in terms of accountability, yes? So unless we have those mechanisms, and there is one issue that I think is important to highlight here, especially with the coming into the movement, or certainly taking up the issue of reparations by CARICOM, the Economic Regional Group for the Caribbean region, there are many of us who are CARICOM nationals. Basically, we are citizens by descent. Some of us have taken out citizenship in a legal way, and others are citizens. We might not have gone through that legal process, but we are entitled to that citizenship. But the Caribbean governments, in terms of how they organise themselves at this time, really only can talk about gaining a mandate of the people in the Caribbean. But even that is not happening to the degree that it should be happening. And we, the people, are in touch with the people in the Caribbean countries who are saying, well, we're not hearing very much. There are organisations who say they speak on behalf of the people, but a lot of family members that we all have, they're not aware of what all of this is about and what is going on. So we always have to assert the primacy of the people, because, you know, democracy is about governing, you know, the rule and will of the people.
That's correct.
And we have to always ensure that governments, whether we say they're ours, African or Caribbean governments, are acting in accordance with our will, not the other way around. We don't have voting rights as diasporas in Europe, North America, wherever we are, for Caribbean governments, even those of us like myself, who is a citizen, and I have taken out legal citizenship of one of the countries that I'm entitled to be a citizen of, and when I get a renewed passport, it will be a CARICOM passport, and so I can sort of claim 2 countries in the Caribbean. So this is the point. We are not yet at the place where we've built the infrastructure and the mechanism to address all of these issues, but we're getting there. But we're not getting there because we all play happy families. We get there through struggle.
That's correct.
Through struggle, through principled struggle, through debate, through discussion, through reasonings, through evaluation, through learning, through actually walking the path
and we've been a bit
making the path.
We've been a bit complacent because we're like saying, okay, then let's leave it to the politicians, because we hear these sound bites that come sometimes through the media. Yeah, they're discussing reparations, and Jamaica's talking about reparations, and Barbados and Grenada's talking about reparations, and then it goes quiet. Yeah,
and that's it.
That's it.
Or we get on social media, which is what I find, news articles from 2013. Oh, Caribbean governments are going to sue. Well, guess what, brothers and sisters? If we have to keep up with what they say they're going to be doing, because the latest on that is that they are not talking about a legal strategy anymore of suing, because of some of the vociferous critiques and alternative pathways that were created by the social movement. And the people, and some of us in the UK were very instrumental in that, I have to say, pointing out the weaknesses of choosing a particular law firm, the weaknesses of a particular legal strategy, and relying on the International Court of Justice. And so our people are actually creating the conditions where even our governments can reflect and choose alternative pathways. Now, the latest on that people should be aware of is that the CARICOM governments are supposed to be writing a letter to the governments of Britain in particular and the other European governments, inviting them to sit down at the table and talk, yes, for a reparatory justice conference. That is the latest that we are hearing from those who are part of the CARICOM Reparations Commission on the strategy. So brothers and sisters, you know, it's about us. It's not just about us, it's about our ancestors. But most importantly, it's about our children and our children's children and future generations.
But the complex nature of what you're talking about is that the British government, in effect, has got to deal with CARICOM, has got to deal with the African Union, and also has got to deal with Africans in the diaspora, not only in Europe, but in South America and in North America.
Absolutely.
So it really is quite a complex legal web.
It's a complex legal web, but the people are prime. The primacy of the people is what I defend. And there are some even within the movement who don't like that. They'll say, well, you know, you're anti-government. No, it's not about governments. It's about what role should governments be playing. Governments should be playing an auxiliary role, a support role to the movement. And that we have good traction on this.
We can pave the way. Let's start today. Activate the spirit within. Even if we lose together, we win. We win. Yes.
In 1993, there was the first conference on reparations for slavery, enslavement, colonization, and neo-colonization, organised by the group of eminent persons that was set up under the auspices of the then Organisation of African Unity. So if we look at that as a model, what the OAU then did, which was the precursor to the current African Union, it was a civil society-led, the group of eminent persons were civil society members of the African diaspora. And it was them that was driving the agenda. And it was, even though it was a civil society agenda, it wasn't grassroots, but it was, you know, some of the elite voices coming out of civil society, but it wasn't government controlled. You had Chief Abiola, who was actually assassinated, and many believe for taking up this cause, who bankrolled, spent a lot of money actually helping to fund that. But the OAU actually played a support role, and that's where we had the setting up of the Africa Reparations movement and various chapters globally, included in the UK. So there was a chapter of ARM UK, Africa Reparations Movement UK, set up by the late Bernie Grant MP, people like Dorothy Kuya, Linda Bellos. There were many others who were part of Africa Reparations Movement UK. And some of us have been saying this is the way forward, because governments will be penalised. And what we know is that many of the governments in the Caribbean, they're talking to all of them. You know, they try and divide and rule, they try and penalise them, make them talk, well, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose that. And so it's safer for our governments to, if you like, stand with the people and point to the people as being the source of this movement. They have to act on behalf of the people, but don't run ahead of the people and displace the leadership of the people who were on this issue for decades before many of you woke up to it. And in fact, you know, the people want to ensure that their interests are going to be secured, that our people's interests are going to be secured, because most of our people are not elites. They haven't got the pleasure of sending their children to schools wherever outside of the country and living at large. They're suffering. They're relying on barrels and resources from those of us in the diaspora. They're relying on our resources in terms of sending money back home. So this is why we have to put the people first. Now, in relation to this march, what was beautiful about this march is that it was from the bottom up. This was no government in Africa or the Caribbean throwing resources at us. This was not any of our elite leaders. This was ordinary people, bottom-up leadership. And the bottom-up is showing the elites in our community that we're not stupid. We know how to organise. We have our own intellectuals that have been made in our struggle, that have been fashioned in this movement, that are not controlled by the bureaucracy, that are not controlled by the establishment, and that they are not controlled by money. Because that's another way that we get control. That is the revolutionary potential of this march. Now, I'm saying that because where there is great victory or the potential of it, then there is going to be great trial and tribulation. We are also aware that because of what we've done, we have shown others that we can actually speak for ourselves and lead ourselves.
And shown up others as well.
Right, shown up others. We know that there will be a target on some of us.
That's correct.
Even in terms of the security and the defence of our operations. Because this example of the people leading the people is not an example that most of those who are in power want to be replicated. They don't want that to be replicated in terms of the struggles in Africa today. So one of the people we had speaking at Parliament Square was Dali Mpofu, who is, I think, national chairman of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Now, anybody who just Google them, they are one of the fastest growing political parties, not only in Africa, but the world. Youth-led, one of their leaders is Julius Malema, talking about land reform, reclaiming our industries, our economy. In South Africa, supposedly the country with the strongest economy. This is an example. You know, the African continent is full of young people, people under 30. That potential of that example spreading, uniting with us. We had representatives of the Free West Papua campaign, Benny Wenda, who is their leader in exile. We had representatives of the indigenous government of the peoples of Biafra.
Until we rise up, there'll be no change. We'll stay enslaved until we fight the system and its ways. Don't be afraid, just be the change. And with all this people power.
Yes, I was talking about the representatives from the Biafra struggle in Nigeria, and that's an interesting point to highlight. Because I know that there were some people on the march, other Nigerians who are not of the peoples of Biafra. I mean, they're not necessarily one people, but were saying, oh, why have we got representatives of the Biafra struggle? It's divisive, you know, we want one Nigeria. But this is the complexity of reparations, especially for those of us in the diaspora, because many of the Africans on the continent who are articulating their struggles for self-determination and liberation as reparation struggles feel penned in. They are being culled into these nation states that were set up by the European colonizers. And so to keep people trapped in, say, the nation state of Nigeria is part of the ongoing damage. And Britain has a big role to play there in terms of the way they actually fomented tension and selected and all kinds of, you know, interference in our legitimate, you know, governance in Africa.
Even if we look at the recent scenario with Libya, where it was the most prosperous country in Africa to live in, and since the European Union, NATO have gone in saying they're going to free the people, has now become one of the worst countries in the world to live in at this present time.
Absolutely.
So we only have to see that recent interference, and what a lot of people have to be aware of, it's not just that recent interference, it's a continuous interference in African affairs that has kept various African nations, not just Libya, but we can say Congo, we can say Sudan, we can say Nigeria, various African nations, Rwanda, have been kept at war over the last 40, 50, 60 years continuously in order, as you say, to keep the situation in Africa divisive.
That's right. And to continue to have us divided and ruled, fighting amongst each other. And some of the conflicts, the civil unrest and conflicts, are because of the denial of African sovereignty of the indigenous peoples of that continent, who reject those abominations of these colonial borders. So when we say that education is part of the preparation for reparations, we ourselves as African people need to learn about how other sections and members of our family articulate their struggle and why it is they refuse to be, you know, literally just pushed into these abominable nation states that are perpetrators of violence. So I just wanted to clear that up as well, because we know this is some of the feed forward we've already been getting. Oh, it's the why this group, why not that group? This was a people's march. Whoever felt able to identify with the aims of the march came forward. And I just wanted to reiterate the aims, because even though there have been several reports of the march, none of them have actually spoken to the organising committee. And even though we provided a leaflet with the aims at the beginning of the march at Windrush Square, we still haven't seen these aims reflected in any of the reports.
There was a lot of media there on the day, but nobody actually really put across the narrative of the organisers of the march. And we want to make that clear. Esther, you're the official spokesperson, for the, what was it, 1st of August Reparations Day.
I am one of them, but I'm
march,
I'm one of them, and I'm the main one who has been speaking. And so I just want to reiterate the aims of the march in moving forward. First one being to draw attention to African people's global determination to not let the British state and other perpetrators get away with the crimes of the Maangamizi, which is the African Holocaust and continuum of chattel, colonial and neo-colonial enslavement, to hand in the Stop the Maangamizi, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide petition, requesting an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for Truth and Reparatory Justice in order to raise consciousness about the fact that all the attacks upon us in both individual and collective instances amount to genocide and ecocide in international law, in the Maangamizi continuum and continuity, therefore triggering an obligation to repair the harm. But before we can repair the harm, we have to stop the harm. You cannot repair or reparate when the harm is still being perpetrated.
And when we're saying genocide, we're talking about the targeting of the African Caribbean race,
That's right.
which has been perpetrated
That's
for
right.
centuries. And when we're talking ecocide, more importantly, we're talking about the destroying
of the
natural environment.
That's
and
right.
nature, which is being supported at this present time by the UK government, the US government, and also the European Union, supporting corporations like Monsanto.
Exactly,
Yeah.
you got it, brother.
Okay.
And also, one of the speakers who would have been on the march, but unfortunately got delayed in Nigeria, was the European coordinator for the MOSUP, the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni Peoples, Laz Tamana. He gave a message, a solidarity message, that may or may not have been read out, but I spoke to him personally on Friday, the day before the march, and in the Niger Delta, it is said that that is the most polluted place on earth. And even though there have been various court cases to try and hold Shell to account, they have said that the cleanup, the environmental cleanup of that land, those waters that have to sustain people, could take in excess of 30 years. That is 2 generations.
And that crime goes direct, as well as organising a march to Parliament, we could organise one to Buckingham Palace, because it is Royal Dutch Shell.
That's
and
right.
the very elite of these countries have shares in that particular company.
That's right.